In this video, I'll show you how implied lines can add tension to your painting. And it's in my new book, Ellen's Guide to Design Elements, where the Kindle is only $5 on Amazon. Closure is one of the most important design principles. And like all design principles, it's a universal law, not just related to art. And how do I know closure is a uniform law? Well, first of all, it means that we as a viewer want to complete shapes when we see parts that are missing. And why that's important in life? Well, if you're in the woods and you see a lion and part of his body is interrupted by trees, you can still see that lion through the trees. It's a survival skill. So how can the artist use this tension that we feel toward wanting to complete this shape and to the frustration if there are too many parts missing or if critical parts are missing? Well, let's break this down and see what this open shape really is. It has broken lines. That's not very exciting, but it has implied lines, and the implied lines are where the magic happens, where the viewer sees this line as continuous, even though it isn't. We see lines jumping through space. Where should these implied lines be? Well, let's take a look at a box with either just the corners visible or the sides visible. When the corners are visible, the viewer can easily fill in the rest of the box with implied lines. With only the sides visible, it's much more difficult to find the implied corners. So having the corners makes the form more understandable. Similarly, with landscaping, we usually have the bushes placed so that we can see the corners rather than having the corners hidden, because this look is more aesthetically pleasing. This is a simple application of implied lines. These giraffes are aligned so that they are parts of these two curves that travel over positive and negative spaces. The positive spaces are the giraffe, the negative spaces are the areas in the background. It links the animals together, and if they didn't line up, a sense of unity would be lost. This is a more subtle way of using implied lines, where they form implied right angles. You can see that this branch forms a right angle with its shadow. And Dunstan calls these internal right angles and says that they're the oldest and most common ways to strengthen a design. This is another example of an implied right angle. We see all of this right angle here, but this one is implied because the bottle is partly hiding it. We should not only be able to draw a line that defines a figure, but we must also be able to grasp how these parts are interrelated, like these dotted lines connecting these parts together. Implied lines can suggest intense light. Look at these two lighthouses and see which one you think looks the brightest. I think you would agree that it would be this one because we're missing the lines on the left side, as if the light is so intense that it's bleaching away that area. We generally don't want a line to cut off a corner like this, but it's okay if it cuts off the corner and then comes back in again, and we can fill in this implied line. It's also okay if it goes behind something, as long as it comes out the other side, and we can imagine the path going behind this rock. When you crop a curve, clearly crop it and don't tickle the border with it or have any part of the curve tangent to the edge of the paper. Just make sure you cut it cleanly. And then sometimes the path isn't so obvious, like these orange dots that we can follow. Lines can imply a connection between two objects. So this river implies a connection between the apple and the sun, since it seems to connect them. And we're wondering how the apple resembles the sun. And similarly, this lightning is connecting the whipped cream with the clouds. And we start to look at the characteristics of each and how they're similar. But these aren't implied lines anymore. They're real lines. But what they imply is a connection between two different objects. We can also have lost and found shapes. Now, this first picture I think is a little boring, but look what happens when I lose parts of the coffee pot and the flower pot in back. I leave enough for the viewer to piece together the shape so he knows what it is, and that usually means that you have to show a little more than half of the object for it to be generally recognizable. But look what else happens. It makes those objects less important, so now the soda is dominant. And having something dominant means that there must be at least one subordinate, so that dominance requires variety. Now, these three objects don't look very unified, other than they form a triangle. But this feels very unified because these back objects are now supporting the main event, the soda. In this picture, I think there's a little too much for the viewer to finish. He can finish the saucer and the lemon, but this holder is a little bit of a problem. And we're relieved to see some space on the other side so we can just enjoy the shapes. And we generally want to have some room for the viewer to look at a complex area like this. And this side should be relatively simple, just showing the table. But look what happens when we crop on both sides. The cup looks like it's squished, and the viewer may just walk away because there's just too much for him to figure out. We use implied shapes when drawing objects, like the triangular shape of the figures and the box-like structure of the dog's body. Paintings are usually structured by implied shapes. My deer drawing is a C composition where we feel the trees curving up and around behind the deer. The C composition usually has more weight in the front arm with details and contrasts, and a lighter distant arm with few details or contrasts. And the focus is usually near the middle of the C, so this deer could theoretically be moved back a bit. I want to talk about adding invisible back lines, which is called drawing through, and it's sort of the opposite of implied lines. Like this is the box that we see, and we would imply these lines that go to the back corner, but that's hard for us to see. So when they are actually drawn in like that, it helps us visualize the box better. And similarly with this bowl, we would want to try to figure out how wide this base is, but it's much nicer if it's actually shown. So oddly enough, they strengthen the three-dimensional shape by implying that the object is transparent so we can see the back lines, but we know that they're not transparent. And we're perfectly happy having these lines explicitly shown. It makes closure even stronger. Now, of course, the artist can partially hide these lines so that we see them intermittently. Now, when we add colors and values to show form, like when we use oils or acrylics, we don't draw the back lines anymore, and that it would be confusing. If I had a back line here, would that mean that the pot was partly transparent? Then why does it have a light and shaded area? So in general, either we draw the back line like this, or we use color and values to show the form. Check out my book on Amazon, Ellen's Guide to Design Elements, and please remember to subscribe.